we're going to do a picket line around his house, okay? Yeah! So are we ready to do it? Okay, let's go. Yeah, around the house.
I want y'all to line up, and I want to stop y'all all around the house. Everywhere we go! We are NACA! We are NACA! The mighty NACA!
What's your fucking name, huh? Bruce Marks. My fucking name.
It's personal when someone loses their home. That's right. Someone has to live with that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Fucking lay you right out.
We're going to make the consequences of their actions personal to them.
Go.
Come on.
John Mack, save our home. John Mack, save our home. John Mack.
We will go into their neighborhood. We will educate their children on what their parents do. Because they should be ashamed.
That's right.
They should be ashamed.
Your Honor, for many years, I operated a Ponzi scheme through the investment advisory side of my business. I knew what I was doing was wrong, indeed criminal. Plunder! 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 Will anybody do the time? What I was doing was wrong. Knew what I was doing was wrong. Knew what I was doing was wrong.
We say we live in a capitalistic society. What does that mean?
Capitalism is our way of life, the market system its highest expression. Our media hypes it in quasi-religious terms, even if its impact is sometimes quite negative and even debated in classrooms.
Can't we agree that capitalism is an economic system, a system for the production and distribution of things we need and want?
I won't agree to that. Not until you say something about government, too. There has to be a legal basis for any economic system to operate.
Most of us recognize we live in an inherently volatile system. Not problem-free, but so the conventional wisdom goes, better than any alternative. Many still believe the free market is our salvation, even as our economy has crashed, brought down not just by greed, but calculated scams and schemes that flouted the intent of our laws, enriched a few, and devastated the economy, leading to a massive loss of jobs, homes, and personal wealth. In 2006, my film In Debt We Trust warned of a coming economic collapse.
Listen, I think the next great economic crisis in this nation is going to be brought about by the debt load. It will create an economic crisis so deep that it will threaten us as a nation.
I was called a doom and gloomer, an alarmist.
I want Dan the Schechter was just written another book called Plunder.
I followed up with a book that came out before Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. Speaking on Wall Street, I called for a jailout, not a bailout.
I used to think of Wall Street as a financial center. I now think of it as a crime scene.
Now it's time to make the case for why the financial crisis is a crime story. And I'm not the only one who sees it this way. Nomi Prinz was a managing partner at Bear Stearns and Goldman Sachs.
This is the most expensive takeout, the biggest crime in world history. We're talking about a crime we can't even quantify. You're talking double-digit trillions of dollars minimum.
This film will explore the scale of monies missing, written off, lost, ripped off in these various scams, and in the case of the bailout funds, unaccounted for. Graydon Carter, editor of Vanity Fair, may have summed it up best when he wrote, "It can fairly be said that the chain of catastrophic bets made over the past decade by a few hundred bankers may well turn out to be the greatest nonviolent crime against humanity in history. They brought the world's economy to its knees, lost tens of millions of people their jobs and homes, and trashed the retirement plans of a generation. And they could drive an estimated 200 million people worldwide into dire poverty. In other words, never before have so few done so much to so many. In one expert's estimate, the total money lost may reach $196.7 trillion, and that could be low."
Like millions of Americans, I've lost thousands of dollars in retirement funds, and I haven't had it as bad as many. It's not just about them, it's about me too. I have a stake in it, and like millions, I'm angry about the way our economy was wrecked.
The media has been part of this problem, unwilling to expose it when it mattered, and even now unwilling to investigate wrongdoers. To help with our investigation, we spoke with convicted white-collar criminal Sam Antar.
The white-collar criminal has no legal constraints. You subpoena documents, we destroy documents. You subpoena witnesses, we lie. So you are at a disadvantage when it comes to the white-collar criminal. In effect, we're economic predators.
To an investigative reporter on the business beat, Wall Street steals far more than the mafia, says Gary Weiss.
Wall Street takes much larger sums of money than were involved in the mafia scams. The regulatory system is such that they can get away with it.
The lack of media scrutiny, the absence of regulation, the widespread illusion that markets and real estate could only go up created a casino mentality, an environment for successful fraudsters and white-collar criminals. Mo Sasserby was a VP at Standard & Poor's.
There certainly is criminality. We know about it. We know all the people who, in fact, did something rather simple, which is put their hand in someone else's pocket and took money that had belonged to them.
This crime has been 10, 15 years in the making. We're only finding out about this crime because of one specific reason: the tanking economy. Imagine if the economy didn't tank. Imagine if this was allowed to go on for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Imagine how big it would have gotten then.
No, I don't want to step on her voice.
Okay, so what do you want to... Okay, let's...
David Russell spent 20 years on Wall Street.
Money for nothing for money. Okay, let's do it. Let's print it. When I was working at Lehman Brothers, even brokers were in a place where they didn't want to see it because they were making so much money. They were like, wait a minute, Bernie, don't tell me that. Wall Street hires extremely bright people. These are people who've gone to the best B schools. These are people who've been trained and overtrained. They have been licensed and all this stuff. You can't tell me after you've learned how to digest a financial statement like these guys have that you didn't see something wrong with those books. That's bull.
No,
that's absolute bull. They saw it,
knew it,
but their attitude is, man, that's going to hit let me see if I can get a couple of more of these checks. And then once I'm gone, the house of cards fall apart. Who the hell cares, Money for nothing for money.
Now singing about plunder for this film, Russell, also a musician, believes that the lack of regulation permitted formerly illegal practices to be considered legal.
What it is the same thing that was happening with peanuts was happening on Wall Street. These people knew they were putting out infected stuff.
Sure they
but
did,
they weren't. But because the system was rigged for such a long time, they got used to getting away.
But I think it was legal, and they were allowed to.
They were allowed to be illegal so long that they didn't even know that they were illegal until somebody called them up.
I mean,
Your Honor, for many years, up until my arrest, on December 11, 2008, I operated a Ponzi scheme. I knew what I was doing was wrong, indeed criminal.
Around the corner from the courthouse where Madoff is meeting with the judge and hearing complaints by his many victims, we have Law and Order filming outside another courthouse in New York.
Someday the actor Sam Waterston will prosecute a character based on Ponzi king Bernard Madoff. In the real world, white-collar crime on Wall Street has been underreported, except for a very few high-profile cases, as when hundreds of reporters staked out a New York courthouse to report Bernie Madoff's admission of guilt in his Ponzi scheme.
Millions and millions of dollars. They are also in the courtroom today, many of them incredibly angry.
I had an IRA worth $1.3 million. My other monies was about $1.8 million, and it's gone.
How do you think he got away with this for so long?
How a person can run a scam for so many years without being detected. That was one of the things I thought of. Can't be a scam. Nobody can successfully run a scam for that long.
Madoff was not alone. Regulators are now investigating scores of similar crimes. They say there is a Ponzimonium underway.
There's 4 levels in every white-collar crime. There's the guy that gives the orders, the people that take the orders, the people that knew what was going on but didn't participate, and the people that should have known what was going on, like boards of directors or auditors, but didn't participate too. What they try to do is they try to get to the culpability of the guy at the top by working from the bottom. The problem that you have in the Bernie Madoff case is they got the guy at the top first, and he's protecting the other 3 layers underneath him.
On Wall Street, a lot of the extraction tends to be very borderline legal because the people extracting tend to be the ones setting up the legal framework.
Rogue economics is what Loretta Napoleoni calls it in her new book.
Well, the reason why the line between what is criminal and what is not criminal has disappeared is because of deregulation. When you remove all the restriction, when you remove all the controls, then, of course, what is legal and what is illegal?
So you're creating a crime scene, and you're creating the crime, and you're effectively buying the police officers all at the same time, only in the form of a regulatory body or a politician for the laws that work for Wall Street.
In June 2009, the FBI said it was investigating 1,300 securities fraud cases, including many Ponzi schemes, as well as more than 580 corporate fraud cases. Most of these cases got little attention, but the media loves arch criminals like financier Bernard Madoff. Madoff has now been moved to a federal prison. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, perhaps because he was ripping off the rich, not the poor. The media turned his story into a morality play about a big man taking a hard fall. The public was outraged.
My real concern is that he should get away, or his family should get away with anything at all. They should be stripped of all they have. There are people, like you're saying, sleeping on the street today because of the crime that he committed. And for what? To live like a king? I mean, yacht, private jet, penthouse, people's money.
His victims believe there's more to the story, says investor Richard Friedman.
I came to the courthouse to speak on behalf of a lot of the Madoff victims who cannot speak.
Do you believe there could be a cover-up in the works?
Of course there's a cover-up. The government does not want people to know how grossly negligent the SEC was in investigating him.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here to testify before your committee today regarding my 9-year-long investigation into the Madoff Ponzi scheme. The SEC exactly where to look, providing them with a long series of clear warnings that any trained investment professional would have immediately understood. Inexplicably, the SEC never acted upon those repeated and multiple warnings over a 9-year time span.
It's the job of regulators to rein in Wall Street in much the same way as the police are supposed to rein in the general public. You don't rob banks, you don't mug people. It's the job of the regulators to fulfill that function with Wall Street.
My team and I kept collecting additional information, and I kept sending it to the SEC, and they kept ignoring it.
If you exceed the speed limit, if you rob somebody, you at least theoretically, when caught, will be punished. And see, this is the difference with Wall Street and its regulators, is that there's absolutely no assurance that you will be punished in any sense of the word.
when a multi-billion-dollar case is handed to them on a silver platter.
It seems to me a private, with all of your investigators and all of your agency and everything that you all describe, one guy with a few friends and helpers discovered this thing nearly a decade ago, led you to this pile of dung that is Bernie Madoff, and stuck your nose in it, and you couldn't figure it out. Single-handedly diffuse the American public of any sense of confidence in our financial markets if you are the watchdog. You have totally and thoroughly failed in your mission. Don't you get it?
These are complicated white-collar crimes of which the government does not have the resources to thoroughly prosecute. And the white-collar criminals know it. So they set it up not as a single transaction that's a crime, but a series of transactions that once it's all put together, makes it a crime. Unless you're willing to put these pieces together, you can't find the crime.
But to do that, you have to go beyond the prosecution of one wrongdoer and look at the way Wall Street itself became a Ponzi scheme. You have to examine a pattern, a system of criminality, which brought the investment and real estate worlds together in a multi-trillion-dollar scam. To simplify, there were three interconnected rings in this circus involving the biggest firms in the industry. It started in the real estate business, where our desire for homes, the American dream, was turned into a scheme. First, predatory subprime lending over years got people into mortgages they couldn't afford and that the lenders knew they couldn't sustain. It was enabled by artificially low interest rates, with financing provided by 25 of the top banks in the country. The second component of the crime involved what happened next, when the biggest banks and investment houses on Wall Street bought and then securitized loans as structured financial products. These mortgage bundles would be sold worldwide without full disclosure of their lack of underlying assets or the risks. The banks that bought these derivative products failed to do due diligence, relying on rating agencies that overvalued their worth and accounting firms that did not do their job. The whole process was corrupt to the core. Finally, the third level of this interconnected but decentralized criminal enterprise involved insuring these often fraudulent practices, in some cases betting against them by the very people who sold them, to guarantee that they would be protected when borrowers who couldn't afford the loans defaulted. They used insurance companies like AIG. Put these three criminal components together and a pattern emerges, a pattern of financial crime.
I want a man who's a mortgage lender, oozing assurance and dripping wit.
The financial crisis started because people could no longer afford to make payments on their subprime mortgage loan.
This is a ghost town right now, a ghost street. All of these properties have been foreclosed. All of them. Did you see anyone on this street? Nobody lives here. Nobody wants to rent here.
The housing crisis hit America like a tsunami, destroying neighborhoods and costing millions of families their homes.
That has been foreclosed. This one foreclosed. This one foreclosed. Foreclosed. Everything.
Session, you're my bailout man.
We want folks to, instead of sitting up in their little insulated offices on some floor, we want folks to be brought into a place where they feel uncomfortable because we've come into their domain. We want to be inside so that we're in their face. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah. Yes.
Anybody worried about that?
No.
Oh, I'm glad y'all not worried about that, right?
Many homeowners oppose the government bailout of the investment bank Bear Stearns because of the company's role in subprime lending. Some, led by NACA, the Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, under CEO Bruce Marks, protested.
Let's try some work. All right, hello?
Marx calls himself a bank terrorist and is known for his radical tactics like swamping financial firms with protesters and also personal attacks on big bank CEOs.
The solution that we're saying costs not one penny of taxpayer dollar. All that we're saying is the people who have created the crisis, who've profited from the crisis, need to fix it. Let's stop the resets, because no one can afford the 12 or 14% interest rates. Let's roll back some of those high rates to the initial rate that people were qualified for.
Don't play the victim.
But this is
you
a
are
win.
a wonderful man, Bruce.
But this
Don't
is a
play the victim.
This is a
we
win-win.
all make decisions.
Neil, this is a win-win. If you restructure a loan to make it affordable for the homeowner, everybody wins.
Fine.
The homeowner wins.
How did it happen? Why did so many top banks lend to some of the poorest members of society in a practice known as subprime lending, featuring loans like the one called Ninja? No income, no jobs, no assets. Apparently no problem. The reason? Higher fees up front and billions more when mortgages were turned into securities resold by Wall Street.
I'm a person that's trying to save my house. I'm in foreclosure right now. I feel like someone's hand's in my pocket, and I just like a fair break, a fair shake, and the American dream.
Most of the world is sleeping. They're not aware of all the ins and outs of buying a house and all. They're not attorneys. They don't know. We don't know. And it's really up to the guys that do know. They should be helping us, the people that don't know. But the sad thing is, they're doing just the opposite. They're taking advantage of our lack of understanding.
60% of the subprime borrowers could have qualified for less costly prime rates, but most were told their homes would go up in value. Many accepted onerous terms to give their families a piece of the American dream. Many, lulled into believing they could afford houses with no money down and low introductory interest rates, watched the cost of adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs, shoot up.
When I first got it, I got a 1% introductory loan. Then my mortgage came down. The second month, it went up to 7.9. Oh. And now it's up to 9.9. And it just keeps on going up every month because of the federal index keeps going up. Well, it's going down, the federal index, and my mortgage ain't going down. It's still going up. You know?
If I'm paying $2,800 a month for my home, I want to live next to J-Lo and Mark Anthony. Not where I live.
It started at 7-something, now it's 9.8. It keep going up and up and up and up, and we have no one to help us. And this is the reason why I'm here today, to represent everyone, because I feel that we should not have to leave our homes, our dream, even our shelters, because of, the rates are going up so high, and we don't even understand why it's going up. It's going in somebody's pocket, but not ours.
The financial future's looking pale. All the big banks are gonna fail. Too many bad mortgages for sale. And nobody wants my debt anymore.
It should have been no surprise to anyone. Fraudulent lending practices resulted in a steep rise in foreclosures beginning in late 2006. Some of the biggest subprime lenders themselves later declared bankruptcy. In the news media, homeowners took most of the blame. It was said they had exercised a failure of personal responsibility. Irresponsible borrowing was stigmatized. Irresponsible lending was not.
If you say that people made bad decisions, right? Well, maybe you can argue that 5,000 people made bad decisions, or 10,000, or 100,000. But when it gets to 1 million people making bad decisions, and then 5 million people making bad decisions, and 10 million people making bad decisions, because now we're over 10 million people at risk of foreclosure, at some point it turns from making a bad decision because there is a scheme out there. There's a home ownership deception scheme out there.
Enter the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI describes its responsibility for investigating financial and mortgage fraud on its website. It is called Mortgage Fraud an Epidemic.
They're calling it Operation Malicious Mortgage. The FBI unveiled the results of a 3.5-month probe into mortgage-related fraud. FBI Director Robert Mueller.
Through this operation, more than 400 defendants have been charged, and we have obtained 173 convictions in crimes that accounted for more than $1 billion in estimated losses.
The FBI first warned of this fraud epidemic in 2004, reporting also, though, that their corporate crime units had been downsized to join the fight against terrorism. Some criminal cases are reported in the press, but not all are prosecuted, with companies often paying fines rather than facing a judge or a jury. Goldman Sachs paid $60 million to settle a subprime complaint. The Massachusetts authorities said they had designed mortgages to fail, and they paid $60 million, but they did not admit any guilt.
That's standard. It's standard when Wall Street firms negotiate what are in effect plea bargains with regulators, for them not to admit guilt.
There'll be another envelope, same amount, tomorrow night.
Old movies help shape our images of gangsters, like this loan shark. But today, fraud has gone legit and become pervasive, even accepted in the financial world. According to an investigation by the Center for Public Integrity, 25 of the sleaziest subprime lenders were backed by the biggest banks in the United States: Citigroup, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, and Bank of America. Together, the Financial Times reported they originated $100 billion in subprime mortgages between 2005 and 2007, almost 3/4 of the total.
What I did in the mortgage industry, I first got involved in about 1998. I was a loan originator. And during that time, what I had seen was nothing short of amazing in terms of, it was very predatory. The techniques that were being used, the salesmanship that was being used, the gimmicks on the loans and how they were structured, it really disturbed me. It was the standard. A question of pervasiveness is one thing, but it was the standard. This is the way the business was run. The idea was to make as much money as possible, not just on the loan, but on the different fees that were added into the loan, and even things that they referred to as back-end bumps on the interest rates, where the borrower had no idea that the actual loan that he was getting is not what he was necessarily qualified for.
Is this criminal?
That's a good question. It's certainly unethical. And the catch-all to this and how they could get away with that is people hear full disclosure. Depending on the lending institution you went to, in other words, a bank, a broker, or a lending institution, all three are different. All three have different sets of regulations that govern them. And so full disclosure wasn't necessarily important to the loan itself. Just get them to sign on the dotted line. If they were happy with the numbers, you have a loan.
My name is Mo Bedard. I'm with LoanSafe. Basically what we do is when someone's having mortgage issues and several other issues, but what I want to do is show the signature of Edna. What we're finding out is 80% of the people don't even know they have violations on their loans. This is the signature on her HUD 1, basically, which is right here. And then they have this signature here, which is her actual signature, which shows a completely different signature. It doesn't take, to me, an expert to figure out that there's something terribly wrong here. Someone gets a set of loan docs, and they're usually probably 2 to 3 inches thick. There might be 15 or 20 really pertinent disclosures that borrowers need to worry about, okay? And they're buried in there, and they don't know what they're signing. Usually, they'll send out a notary to sign the loan with them at loan signing, and the notary usually has no clue of what is in that loan. And it's all part of the scheme, we like to call it. And then we go up here, we start looking at whiteout, and then we have a consultant fee. When you see a consultant fee on a mortgage, That should set off red flags. There's not really any consultants on a mortgage or a sale. It should have been one fee to rise mortgage. This Mark Murphy is apparently someone we need to investigate and find out exactly who he is and why he got $7,800 on this loan. These people basically fraudulently took this woman's home that she's been living in for over 15 years and thinking that it's hers, where it was actually never was hers since 1993.
The fraud and deception that was built into these transactions was a necessary part of the transaction in order to generate the profits. So there were things that were not told or fully explained. In fact, if I may for a second, in talking to one of the mortgage brokers that I was working with, and we had this discussion because I was trying to educate my clients as best I could. And his response to me was, look, I hear what you're saying and I hear what you're doing. That's not what we're here for. If they have a problem a year or 2 or 3 years down the road, they're going to come back to us and they're going to refinance everything anyway. So don't worry about educating your clients. Just sell the loan and get on to the next one.
Housing super salesman Richard Bittner admitted using deceptive practices in a book, Confessions of a Subprime Lender. A mortgage broker named Christopher Jared Warren, not his real name, also wrote a confession of fraud that he personally took part in.
This is something you don't see every day. A local mortgage broker admits on his company's website that he's been committing fraud for the past 7 years.
He explains his motivation for the public admission, saying his behavior utterly disgusts me. Looking back at the life I have led, I beg a higher power for forgiveness.
He's now wanted by police. In June 2009, Anthony Mazzillo, founder of Countrywide, the country's largest subprime lender, was charged with fraud and insider trading. The SEC cited internal emails calling his own financial products toxic and poison.
I think what happened was that the gravy train got so fat, no one cared. They figured that this thing would never end. This was a train that had taken off full speed. There was too much money being made by too many people, especially big people in the business. So why kill the golden goose? Let's just let it ride. They thought there would be no end to this whole thing.
In just 6 months, 3 of the 5 biggest independent firms on Wall Street have now disappeared.
Stocks all around the world are tanking.
The Dow spiraling lower, selling that stopped only with the closing bell, a 504-point plunge on the blue chips.
A once-in-a-half-century, probably once-in-a-century type of event.
$17 trillion. That's the estimate of how much money the financial crisis erased from the value of global share markets.
It is the end of the world as we know it.
Wall Street doesn't do mortgage lending. What Wall Street did was package, sell, repackage, and resell mortgages, making what was a small housing bubble a gigantic housing bubble, and making what became an American financial problem very much a global financial problem.
Welcome to Wall Street Today. Economist Max Wolf, who works in the financial industry, is our tour guide.
You're looking at people who've gone through 10 unthinkable low probability events in a 4-month period, when every time you think you can catch a breather, there's another leg down. Atmospheres on trading floors and in a lot of these firms are funereal. Friends are gone, bonuses are gone, futures are unsure. It's been very difficult.
As we spoke on Wall Street, people wanted to get into the conversation. Most were worried.
I was a bank examiner for 10 years, okay? And I wonder where the regulators are to let Citicorp. I know they got an office in Citicorp's building year-round. You know, where was the SEC? Where are all the guys that are supposed to be watching, you know, what's going on? And, I mean, when I was a bank examiner 20 years ago, you know, we had some crises in the late 80s, early 90s, you know, but we got our arms around it. Nobody got their arms around this. I just wonder if you think the average person in America really grasps the magnitude of the crisis that we're in.
I hope they do, and I think it's an excellent question. My personal guess is no. My personal guess is they'd be much more angry and much more interested if they understand how much is at play here.
The destruction here is around the clock. You shred papers, you shred deals. All the
the money's been made at this point. All the takeout happened a couple years ago. Now you're just sort of looking at the remains of a very profitable time, which will be followed by another very profitable time because the same people will still be involved in structuring the same types of things under the same types of laws. And there's just a continued churning. Just like you destroy paper, you destroy what's in the old deals and you put more stuff in the new ones. It's just this endless recycling. And it makes some people a lot of money and it screws over a lot of other people.
Other People's Money is Prin's insider book on the subject. She helped create the investment vehicles used to package subprime loans. She now sees it as a criminal enterprise.
The biggest crime in all of this is the thing that's the least able to be understood and examined by the FBI, by the Department of Justice, by anyone in Washington. The tiny, tiny lowest layer of the crisis that started with subprime defaulting at the homeowner-borrower level. The money wasn't made there. The money was made because several layers up a pyramid, Wall Street investment firms and commercial bank investment groups decided to repackage those mortgages, create layers of them that they then resold to investors.
Here's what happens. There are 3 defaults on mortgages. The bank that holds those sells those at 10 cents on the dollar to a second bank. That bank puts those together with 3 other defaults and 3 other defaults and makes a second package and sells it to a third bank. The third bank sells 6 of these things for packages and bundles them and sells them to some investor who has no idea what he has.
They borrowed against those layers, which is the real crime. They would take a little piece of a layer of a security underneath which somewhere there was a bunch of home buyers, and they would take it and they would borrow 30 times the amount of money that it represented.
5 big investment banks dominated Wall Street. It is they who took the subprime loans purchased from banks and packaged them as bundled investments to be sold worldwide.
Someone can talk about a poor homeowner who maybe didn't deserve a $120,000 home, but on the other hand, there was someone on Wall Street making a $12 million bonus because of that deal. So we need to be sure that we allocate accountability properly.
There were reports that there was what was called suction from Wall Street. In other words, Wall Street investment houses, as they began to make billions on these securitized loans and CDOs and derivatives, were pressuring the mortgage people at the local level, give us more, give us more, give us more.
Well, the reason why Wall Street was putting the pressure or the sucking sound that you referred to on the loan originators is because the profits that they were generating, when this whole concept first opened up and people realized the money that was to be made on the back end, trading the paper, they were essentially creating liquid cash from nothing.
We're talking trillions of dollars. There's $14 trillion worth of asset backs with subprime and other types of mortgages and CDOs created between 2003 and 2007. $14 trillion were created. On that, investment houses and hedge funds and private equity funds could leverage 30, 40 times. Banks could leverage 15 to 20 times. On average, they could only leverage 13 times, but on certain securities...
But that's more than the value of the whole country, of the whole gross domestic product.
If you, on average, and this is a very conservative estimate, assume that the average leverage for the $14 trillion worth of asset backs and CDOs was 10 times, which to me is a conservative estimate. That's $140 trillion worth of nothing. If you lose the 14 trillion, the other 140 minus the 14 trillion doesn't exist. You have nothing, you have no collateral left to pay to the people that you borrowed money from, and it all falls down.
The practice to sell mortgages to people who clearly can't afford it, so to target these people in order to give them mortgages, and then to use these mortgages to sell it back to the banks in order to create mortgage-backed security is a criminal practice, for sure.
And I think the bank that does that does have liability, civil and conceivably in some cases criminal, but that liability arises when they sell that portfolio of mortgages to investors who believe they are getting safe, sound, secure mortgages. And there are very injured victims at that chain, that end of the distribution chain, because I can direct you to school boards around the country that have lost almost their entire funds and have lost their pension funds.
You sound angry. I am angry. I'm an investor. Okay? I invested in some of these investment companies, and now I have to wait, holding my breath, hoping that I won't take such a large hit.
We can all be wiped out here.
Yes, we all can be. Okay, and left with nothing, and these guys are rewarded.
And I would even say that this is racketeering because it took place between a group of real estate agencies and banks together.
A lot of people made a lot of money, but when these homeowners defaulted in record numbers, the whole system became infected.
I used to think that Freddie Mac was a pimp, but now my mutual fund is the one walking with a limp. And Fannie Mae, you almost failed me, boo, but the faithful feds, they bailed you. Poor Lehman Brothers, y'all got the shaft. Shaft! The government said, good luck with that. Shaft! And AIG, old Uncle Sam, he loaned you $85 billion, but now he owns you.
As ripoffs became apparent, the public became angry, says artist Jeffrey Raymond.
And I paint controversial Wall Street people. And about a year ago, I came up with the idea of painting them on a white background and then letting the public comment if they're that controversial. It's interesting to hear the voice of the public. So instead of using paintbrushes, I use these sticks that they give you at the hardware store. And I dip it in the paint, and the canvas is on the ground, and I just dribble away. And over the course of several days, and maybe 50 layers, it builds up into the kind of recognizable image that you see here. These are the actual photos that I used as a kind of the resource, the visual resource to paint the pictures. There's Henry Paulson, who has ended up being the screaming Pope.
You actually painted on Wall Street. What kind of reaction did you have from people there?
People from Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, for example, lost their job through no fault of their own. And when I gave them a pen, there was that sort of cathartic moment that they got to write. They might write something really obscene. They might write, this was a great company, I'm going to miss everybody. You know, it was the whole span of emotion. As the annotations build up, it almost stops becoming words and almost feels like brushstrokes. So from a painter's point of view, I like how it changes.
What do you think you're able to do that our media isn't?
Well, I think that the media comes at us and just tells us what we need to think or gives you the fait accompli, at least as they see it. And I think that what I give people is the opportunity to participate in the process a little bit. When I'm out in front of Wall Street, because I would typically stand right in front of the New York Stock Exchange, there may be a group of 8 or 10 people sort of staring, looking at the painting, trying to read the comments, trying to decide what they want to write. And their thoughts are being provoked. They actually really have to think about it. The word that shows up on my paintings more than any other word is greed. Greed, greed, greed. Greed's a killer. Greed leads to death. Greed is good, which is that line from Wall Street, the movie. I mean, there's a sense here of, I think, anger and frustration. Wall Street and the world is caught up in a maelstrom of bad stuff. And one of the reasons why I do it is I think people want to have a voice in the process.
I can't put my finger on it, but you know things have gone wrong when I can't even afford to finish this song.
The first major institution to fall in the financial crisis was Bear Stearns, one of the first banks behind subprime mortgages. Its stockholders would eventually be wiped out in the first government bailout. Some saw it as a case of karma. What went around came around.
You can look up
what's happening in the market today.
Now working from home, former Bear Stearns managing partner Bill Bamber is still trying to figure out what happened.
Down about 36%.
What was it like looking at this machine and watching your company disappear?
It was surreal.
Bear's extensive dealings in mortgage-backed securities had certainly left them vulnerable. Less than a year earlier, 2 of their hedge funds collapsed, with the fund's managers later arrested for fraud. The FBI found emails in which they had agreed to sell their worthless holdings while continuing to solicit investments from the public. But there was more to it than that. Just prior to its collapse, parties unknown placed bets that Bear's share price would drop quickly and dramatically. These same parties then used a combination of tactics to ensure it would happen, illegally inflating the circulation of Bear's stock and spreading false rumors about the strength of the company. The financial news channels served as unknowing accomplices.
Herb, would you concede that Bear Stearns was on the Monday before the whole thing blew up? Would you concede Bear Stearns wasn't illiquid at that point?
CNBCs of the world, for example, who report these rumors, and I think that was a contributing aspect to what in effect was a run on the bank, Bear Stearns.
Look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George.
The idea of bank runs is nothing new. It's a Wonderful Life is shown every year on American TV.
You got any money in the bank, you better hurry.
The run on Bear Stearns was unprecedented, brought about deliberately for the financial gain of a few schemers.
George, I am going all out to help in this crisis. I have just guaranteed the bank sufficient funds to meet their needs.
Just took over the bank.
If you remove the fact that there were structural vulnerabilities within, the mortgage business, etc. But if you take a step back and say, okay, there's a difference between that and an 85-year-old firm going out of business in 5 days. What caused that very rapid demise? The final week, as I experienced it on the trading desk, began on the morning of Monday, March the 10th, when we walked in and started to hear the first reports and see the first reports on Bloomberg, for example, that there were liquidity rumors about Bear Stearns.
Around 11 a.m., they watched their stock begin to fall sharply. Suddenly, unsourced rumors of liquidity problems were everywhere.
At that time, Bear Stearns was adequately capitalized.
I want to go to a news conference with Elliot Spitzer. Let's go right now.
Today, I want to briefly address a private matter.
The story about Governor Spitzer broke regarding the prostitution ring.
My or any sense of right
we were,
and wrong.
How shall we say, glad to be knocked off of the #1 news spot at the time.
It was on Tuesday that things really got strange.
We did start to notice some abnormal trading patterns going on with regard to the deep out-of-the-money put options on Bear Stearns stock.
There was a $1.7 million wager placed that Bear Stearns' value would drop by more than half in only 7 business days.
It wouldn't take a massive drop in the share price for those puts to go from, say, 1% up to 2% and double your money in a matter of days.
But the odds were terrible. For these so-called put options to pay out, Bear Stearns would have had to fall harder in a shorter amount of time than any Fortune 500 company in history. It was so foolish that such puts were not even sold at the time. They had to be special ordered. The last time I heard about puts was on September 11th, 2001.
Someone, or many people, benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday.
One example, United Airlines. The Thursday before the attack, more than 2,000 contracts betting that the stock would go down were purchased. It's almost the same story with American Airlines. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge. Unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against.
Someone knew how to profit from that event. Similar scenario played out with Bear.
What do you think is causing these?
By the Wednesday, our CEO went on CNBC to dispel the rumors.
You're saying here there are no problems. So where does all this come from? Well, you know, it's very hard to say.
It was a catch-22 situation. You generally don't want to comment on rumors because if you do, people then think, oh, they must be true. Where there's smoke, there's fire. The Thursday was when we started to hear we were bleeding out, as it were.
Unbeknownst to Bear executives, a questionable practice known as naked short selling was contributing to the steady week-long erosion in their stock price. Obscure trading rules allow someone to sell a share of stock while only providing the buyer with what amounts to an IOU for a short amount of time, until the so-called delivery failure can be resolved. Beginning the day these bets were placed against Bear, millions of delivery failures began artificially inflating the number of shares that appeared in circulation, and therefore deflating the value of each share.
It was strangely calm because it felt as though we were being sucked into a vortex, and there was very little we could do to fight it after there was certain momentum that began with the rumors that it was like a small forest fire that just got out of control.
The Federal Reserve is strongly committed to fully employing our authority.
Loan facility was announced by the Fed coming via JP Morgan on the Friday morning, and the shares dropped basically 50% in the opening moments. You knew it was over, and probably there would be a deal done that weekend.
The banner headline is that JP Morgan Chase is buying Bear Stearns.
Employees discovered that the Federal Reserve Bank was forcing and financing the bank's sale to J.P. Morgan Chase to the tune of $30 billion, but only paying Bear investors $2 a share. The employees who owned 30% of the company's shares were wiped out.
It was a unique firm. I think it was a great firm, filled with really interesting, very hardworking, very astute people. Minutes after Bear inked the deal with JP Morgan, they opened up the discount window for the very first time to all the investment banks in the space. Had Bear had access to that window, would we have survived as an independent entity like we'd always been? Probably not, but we would have had time to negotiate a deal that was good for Bear shareholders, good for Bear Stearns employees, etc., with a larger financial institution.
J.P. Morgan Chase got the deal of the century. The economy was thrown into crisis. Taxpayers were forced to fund a multi-billion-dollar bailout, and parties unknown made $250 million on an investment of just $1.7 million in less than a week.
This goes beyond rumors. There's no violation in law about rumors. There is about collusion. and when I look at a 10-day and 30-day puts, I wonder what's going on here and whether I see this.
Brothers CEO Dick Fuld has told Wall Street executives short-selling hedge funds actively concluded to help cause the demise of Bear Stearns. Obviously, Fuld has a vested interest, and people at Lehman, quite frankly, worried that short sellers caused what was caused at Bear Stearns.
5 months later, Richard Fuld's firm became the next victim, as naked short sellers were at it again, inflating the number of Lehman Brothers shares to 32 million shares in just 1 week.
The crisis in confidence spread throughout the capital markets. Naked short sellers targeted financial institutions. Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, Washington Mutual, and Merrill Lynch all were trapped in this vicious cycle. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs also came under attack.
Who was behind these attacks? Yes, there had been bad loans and poor risk management. But what Wall Street had not counted on were rogue groups of elite defectors, formerly their best and brightest, some of whom had turned out to be even more adept at scheming and lawlessness than those who had first schooled them in such practices. Who had brought down Wall Street? Hedge funds. Back in 2007, with the boom still in full swing, my business partner Rory O'Connor attended this party just off Wall Street for traders under the age of 30. It reeked of affluence, shiny cars, and beautiful people. Hedge funds were like millionaire-only clubs, where ungodly sums could be invested in complicated vehicles in secret, outside the prying eyes of Wall Street regulators. Soon, all the traditional investment firms had their own hedge funds. No wonder so many of these young people wanted in, and at the top.
I mean, I personally spent 5 years in private equity and then made the decision, instead of going back to business school, to move over to the public side. So that was a conscious decision on my part. I think most people probably get involved because there is an opportunity to move up the ranks and make more money at an earlier age in hedge funds than there is in private equity, which is the natural progression after a couple years in an investment banking program.
Well, if you were going to be in the investment world, the best way to, and you're a good investor, the best way to make money is to have a hedge fund, because you get compensated much higher. Hedge funds were being paid 1% of the assets and 20% of the profits in those days. So obviously that was the best way to make money if you were any good at it.
Investor Jim Rogers and a partner named George Soros started a fund because it was the thing to do.
A hedge fund is someone who buys things and at the same time hedges himself by selling short. The problem is most people in the street don't understand selling short.
Terms like selling short and collateralized debt obligations and credit default swaps became the lingua franca of the industry. Nowhere was this more true than in unregulated hedge funds, each boasting its own super-secret, proprietary investment algorithm. They attempted to take the risk out of investing by putting large amounts of money in side bets. Wall Street began putting more money into gambles on the market than money in the market.
But right now, everybody's doing it. It's normal. It's great. Everybody's making a lot of money. But when the thing starts unwinding, then people are going to say, I never did that, or I don't know how he did it, or my lawyer said it was okay. And you know what? The lawyers are saying it's okay. My accountant said it's okay, and the accountants are saying it's okay. Everybody's in the game right now. But it's always happened this way. And eventually it always pops, and eventually everybody suffers.
There's a fine, fine line between a bull and a bear. And there's a fine, fine line between delight and despair. I'm hoping I'll avoid the pain to come from trades yet to unwind.
The side bet that eventually blew up the economy was one of those complicated financial instruments called a credit derivative. Someone wishing to protect themselves on risky investments would pay regular premiums to a firm that would agree to insure them if a loss were to occur. An insurance policy on an investment is a smart idea. Chances are you've taken one out on your house or car. But now imagine that you can take out insurance on someone else's house, and you are permitted to take out multiple policies. You might have seen an opportunity and bought as many policies as you could afford on homes in New Orleans. You would have made a lot of money on the misery of those residents. That's exactly what happened with credit derivatives. Savvy hedge fund managers heard the weather report, knew which way the wind was blowing, and took out an incredibly large number of insurance policies on mortgage-backed securities. When a 50-state Katrina blasted through America, with some of the poorest in the country defaulting on their mortgages in large numbers, those policies paid out in the trillions for hedge fund investors, already some of the richest people in the world. As millions of people went deeper into debt, as inequality grew, a small class of financiers prospered.
The U.S. government is providing an $85 billion emergency loan to rescue AIG. Federal Reserve
Insurance company AIG was a leading seller of credit derivatives.
So a bank, for example, like Goldman Sachs, would create a CDO. It would stick all kinds of subprime loans and packages of them into a package, and then it would go off to AIG, and AIG had a AAA rating, a pristine credit rating, and Goldman would say, you know what, you take this package of junk we've just created and kind of insure it. You basically write a default swap to us. You basically credit insure it. You've got a much better rating than we do, so our investors will buy it from you with that insurance. You make money, we make money, everybody's happy.
Former bank regulator William Black told Bill Moyers this was all deliberate.
This stuff, the exotic stuff that you're talking about, was created out of things like liar's loans that were known to be extraordinarily bad. And now it was getting AAA ratings. Now, a AAA rating is supposed to mean there is zero credit risk. So you take something that not only has significant, it has crushing risk. That's why it's toxic. And you create this fiction that it has zero risk. That itself, of course, is a fraudulent exercise.
Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis?
AIG made guarantees totaling more than their ability to pay, an amount larger than the entire value of the company. Actually, that's a bit of an understatement. AIG, along with others who sold derivatives, had insured their policyholders to the tune of an estimated $596 trillion. Compare this to the gross national product of the entire world, and the problem should become more obvious.
So you were just gambling billions, possibly trillions of dollars.
Well, I wouldn't refer to it as gambling. I would, these transactions were individually underwritten very carefully, and maybe I can provide some more background to you that may be helpful.
If they were carefully underwritten, how come no one wants to buy them?
How could AIG have possibly expected to make good on its promises? One thing we know for sure, AIG executives made huge paychecks selling these credit derivatives to hedge funds and others right up until the economy caved.
Both of you used the term market-driven, financial tsunami, as if you weren't part of it. Do you feel you have any responsibility for what's happened in our economy?
The Village Voice called this a scheme that smacks of security fraud, asking how could they not have known they were putting at risk the largest insurer in the world and all the businesses and individuals that it covered.
Of all of you, just by a show of hands, how many of your banks engaged in that, default swaps?
AIG was the biggest seller of derivatives, but it was far from the only one.
Well, most of you engaged in all, or at least some of the activities that actually created this crisis, in my opinion. Because every one of those activities, to me, I think they're illegal. I cannot believe no one's prosecuted you on this. Do you understand that this is a little difficult for most of my constituents to take? That you learned your lesson? And it's all the same people doing this. The same people who created SIVs, who created CDOs, who created credit default swaps that never existed a few years ago. You created them. You created the mess we're in.
Until the firms that sold credit derivatives can make good on them, paying out the trillions they owe to parties unknown who placed those bets, the wheels of Wall Street will remain to some degree locked up. No wonder some prophetically referred to credit derivatives as financial hydrogen bombs. Back in 2007, none of the people at this party seemed very concerned.
Is it conceivable to you that the activity we've been seeing in this area could lead to some severe effects on the global economy in the not-too-distant future?
I think there are other underlying factors that will have greater impacts on the economy, especially in the U.S., more so than the some of the exotic investment instruments that the hedge fund world has been using.
So we don't need to fear hedge funds?
I don't think you need to fear hedge funds. I think hedge funds provide a pretty intelligent investor base, a more savvy investor base for the market.
I love subprime. It's my kind of place.
Wall Street used to invest in the American economy in companies that used its money to produce goods and services. But then Wall Street became the American economy. Our financial system was re-engineered through what's been called financialization, with banks, credit cards, real estate, and insurance companies as the new power players.
Capitalism has sort of gone off the rails. It's ceased to be capital. It's financialization. The fact that it's now all about speculation, the fact that it's about Ponzi schemes, the fact that it's about selling and buying paper from an economy of real goods, real commodities, and real services to a system where people were buying and selling money, buying and selling assets, buying and selling other firms, where no new value was created.
Mo Sasserby says the whole system has gone predatory.
I think we had a transition from what truly was a free market system to something now that is out of control and probably what I would define as a predatory system. Frequently markets that are manipulated for the end of maybe a few out there, few investors, mega investors. It's even that's very difficult to tell. We still don't know who in fact is making money while so many in fact are losing money on Wall Street right now.
There's something rotten in Denmark, some rotten in Spain, some rotten in Washington. It ain't ever gonna change. And all I wanna know, what became of the little guy?
As Businessweek noted, what we're observing in all of its bizarreness is the ancient paradox of what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. The irresistible force in this case is the U.S. economy. The immovable object is a wall of debt that now can't be paid back.
We're in a position where the volume of debt, mortgage debt, corporate debt, personal debt, and even state and local debt is larger than the ability to pay.
The rise of a credit-based economy fueled a growing disparity between rich and poor. Wealth was transferred from the middle class to the upper class. The middle class watched its savings literally drop to nothing, as every spare dollar went into paying off borrowed money. The upper class, meanwhile, figured out how to make money from money, or more accurately, how to sell their debt, a promise to pay in the future. Real estate expert Ron Silverman calculates the cost.
You are talking in recent years of a problem that every year transfers hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hundreds of billions?
Hundreds of billions of dollars.
You said billions.
I said billions, not millions, from the pockets of the poor to people who are far better positioned than their so-called victims.
Ago, the upper 1% of the population owned 30% of America's returns to wealth, that is dividends, interest, and capital gains. 5 years ago, they'd raised their proportion from 37% to 57%, and today it's estimated that the upper 1% of America's population owns almost 70% of the returns to wealth.
70%?
70%.
That's huge.
Yes, it is. It's unprecedented. It's essentially, it makes America look like a third world banana republic.
Angry homeowners marched down Park Avenue and into the lobby of Bear Stearns.
Our money has been spent for this beautiful lobby. Now it's the homeowners lobby. Now it's our lobby.
Actually, walked out to check it out, and
Bill Bamber was in the building.
I'd only seen things like that generally when I've been visiting Latin American countries.
But they were saying Main Street, not
Wall Street, right?
There were people who were facing foreclosure in some cases, blaming Wall Street.
The message that they were getting was that Bear Stearns was getting bailed out at the expense of Main Street, bailing out the fat cat investment bank, the individual homeowner per se.
True?
Well, it's certainly not true if you talk to anybody who was working at Bear Stearns or any investor in Bear Stearns.
The people that own Bear were wiped out. They were destroyed.
Ironically, Bear Stearns was also in debt. The billions of dollars they received in the bailout did not go to the company's shareholders, but to those to whom they owed money.
It was a deal that ultimately saved the creditors to Bear Stearns by forcing it into J.P. Morgan at the expense of equity holders.
Michael Hudson points out that both the homeowners and corporate America are now in hock to the debt machine.
Many corporations are effectively in negative equity or in a technically insolvent position, headed by the financial sector, by the banks themselves.
Is there any sympathy for the demonstrators in the building that day?
I don't know if there's a lot of sympathy per se to their point of view. I mean, we were, in a similar boat, so to speak.
A similar boat, perhaps, but only one had life preservers.
Look at the fact that the government now is funneling money to a major bank and saying, if you can do that with a bank, why not do it with strapped homeowners facing foreclosure as Democrats?
It's not fair to the rest of us, What are we supposed to do? They can bail them out, but they can't help us.
The people who are losing homes now, they could have used that money to, not to take them out of the loan, but at least to revamp the loans for them and make it easy for them to live.
As the crisis increases desperation on all sides, Hudson says Wall Street is waging war on Main Street in a battle for survival.
We are seeing a class war in this country such as you've never seen in the entire history of the United States.
A class war?
A class war, except in this case, the class war isn't the kind of war that Marxists and socialists talked about. It's not between employers and employees, because employment's going to be shrinking.
Half of Bear Stearns' 14,000 employees would eventually be laid off by J.P. Morgan Chase.
And look, any of the Bear Stearns employees, you're welcome to join us.
Yes, sir.
Sure. You're going to be in our situation.
Bring everybody from down that end of the lobby over here.
It's a class war between creditors and debtors. It's going to be a fight between the financial sector and what's called the real economy, the economy of production and consumption. And the financial sector has prepared itself and positioned itself to come out on top by being able not only to foreclose on the property of debtors, but to get a government bailout for all of its losses.
We don't want a government bailout. We don't want a government bailout. Because these folks knew what they were doing when they did it.
Everybody have a dream. Everybody have a chance to get the dream. It's not just one class or one race. And at this point, nobody's getting that piece of dream at all.
Employment is going to go down. Markets are going to shrink. People are going to default even more on their mortgage debts, on their credit card debt, on their student loans. So you're going to have an exponentially rising trend of defaults. You're going to see a transfer of property from debtors to creditors.
A depression?
Not only a depression, but an economic polarization.
It sounds bad.
Yes, it's very bad.
The media was now out in force covering the protests. Many homeowners would not talk to them.
Would anybody like to get their voice out to CNBC so everybody can hear what you're protesting right now? No.
A CNBC reporter turned to me when others were silent.
Why hasn't the media, your media, CNBC,
focused its concerns on the homeowners and the people who have been the victims of this crisis. You've paid all your attention to the CEOs, who's losing money, which firms are writing down loans. But the people who've been victimized by the subprime scam have not been covered by CNBC. And I think the media has responsibility for this. You know why? Because CNBC and other media outlets were taking ads from these mortgage lenders. They're taking ads from these credit card companies. They're making money on getting people into debt and getting people to suffer. And that's why you have a responsibility to tell this story and to tell it loud. And my hunch is what I'm saying now will never make air on CNBC. So why do you think people don't want to talk to you? Because they hate you. They think the media is part of the problem. They don't think that you're going to help them. They think you're going to help Bear Stearns.
Tonight of what's been called the worst financial crisis in modern times.
Where was the media when all this was going on? Why were there so few warnings and investigations in what was to become an economic catastrophe?
Things are only going to get worse. We want to talk a little bit more. You've been incredibly pessimistic.
There is what passes for coverage on CNN and every network. There's reporting in the New York Times and the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, magazines like Fortune, Barron's, Forbes, financial blogs. In 2006, I wrote an appeal to journalists to report on the emerging credit crisis in Neiman Reports, the journalism review at Harvard University. The response was tepid. There was no response. And I wasn't the only one running into a media refusal to admit what was going on.
Why do you think that a recession is coming? Just how bad is it going to be?
I think it's going to be pretty bad, and whether it starts in 07 or 8, I think is immaterial. And I also think it's going to last not just for quarters, but for years. See, the basic problem with the U.S. economy is we have too much consumption and borrowing and not enough production and savings. And what's going to happen?
Every time I would find myself in that venue where I was on television, surrounded by other supposed experts on economics or experts in the market, they would completely dismiss what I was saying.
Believe any of it whatsoever, Michelle, excuse me, but what he's saying is that savings is way down in this country, but wealth has risen dramatically. The United States economy has never been better shape. There is no tax increase.
Around the same time that In Debt We Trust was premiering in theaters, businessman Peter Schiff was literally being laughed off Fox News because of his bleak predictions.
Most of the profits that people have in real estate are going to vanish, just like the profits in the dot-coms in 1999-2000. It's a fantasy. People can't sell their house. The inventories are exploding all over the country. Houses are on the market for 6 months a year. There's no bidders. The price is going to fall through the floor. You guys are deluding yourself.
It was like, there's no way this can happen. I'm just a perma-bear. This is gloom and doom. I'm Chicken Little. This is a fantastic economy.
You could blame them for their skepticism. After all, the United States was in the midst of an economic boom after a decade of unparalleled prosperity. The dot-com bubble had burst in the year 2000, but then with help from the government and the Federal Reserve Bank cutting interest rates, the housing market exploded, and America found itself a new bubble. Naysayers were dismissed.
I didn't see how this thing could have gone on for another decade. It seemed like the problem was so enormous, that the real estate bubble was so huge, that the bad debts that had been accumulated by our financial institutions was just so enormous. I didn't see any way that we could sweep it under the rug much longer. And so, even the fact that we made it to 2007, was an accomplishment.
August 2007 marked the beginning of the end of an era. What had gone up was now coming down. Foreclosures were up 93% from the year before. In London, there was a run on Northern Rock Bank. More bank write-downs followed. Billions at UBS and Citigroup. Fannie Mae, the largest source for home loans, reported a $3.55 billion loss for the fourth quarter. In March 2008, the fifth largest investment bank in the world, Bear Stearns, was on the verge of collapse. Many of the nation's most respected financial journalists were still getting it wrong.
Get my money out of there. No, no, no. Bear Stearns is fine. Do not take your money out. This is really, look, if there's one takeaway other than a plus 400 somewhere, Bear Stearns is not in trouble. I mean, if anything, they're more likely to be taken over. Don't move your money from there. That's just being silly. Don't be silly.
The media was complicit, says Dean Starkman, a financial journalist now with the Columbia Journalism Review.
The business press, former colleagues of mine, friends of mine, did not really recognize and understand what they were up against, how dramatically the world had changed, the lending industry had changed, things that you've kind of documented, how out of control Wall Street had become. And I think it's a real contributing factor to how we got to where we are today.
Starkman even compares the journalists who cover Wall Street to reporters sent to Iraq. He said they too were embedded, but in the corporate culture.
The Great Panic of 2008 is the equivalent for the business media what the Iraq War was for the Washington Press Corps. This is the financial story of the last 70 years. So the parallel is fair. You could further extend the analogy a little bit to think about the idea, this concept of being embedded. In the Iraq situation, of course, reporters were literally embedded with the troops. In the financial situation, I think that you could begin to make the case that the press corps itself was sort of embedded within a particular narrative that has its origins on Wall Street. I don't think that analogy is out of whack at all.
Business channels compete for viewers, with the Fox Business Channel claiming that its main competitor, CNBC, owned no less than by General Electric, was anti-business. Fox News hyped its new kissing cousin to the skies.
I can guarantee you that.
Look, we have a situation now in which there are several major parts of the news media that are, for all practical purposes, part of movement conservatism. The New York Post, the Washington Times, and in which other news organizations are intimidated, at least to some extent. There's nothing like Fox News on other TV networks. You can look at, but there's no liberal equivalent to Fox News. If Bush said that the Earth was flat, the headlines would read, "Opinions differ on shape of the planet."
There was one more factor that few in the media covered because it was about the media, about the infusion of nearly $3 billion in advertising revenues from dodgy lenders and credit card companies between 2002, when the housing bubble took off, until its crash in 2007.
Essentially, an entire industry became predatory.
Predatory, like criminal?
Yeah, deceptive marketing on a mass scale as a function of corporate policy.
When the business press was covering the collapse of so many firms, comedy outlets began satirizing that coverage.
With all economic factors indicating the U.S. is heading for a prolonged recession, some experts are suggesting that the government should stop dumping all of our money into an enormous hole. Is it time to close the national money hole?
That kind of talk is alarmist and irresponsible.
No reasonable person is advocating that we are going to stop destroying money. But the American people earn that money. They have the right to decide how it should be destroyed.
So you are in favor of personal money holes?
Yes, people should be able to dump money into a hole in their backyard or flush it down the toilet. Let the free market decide the most efficient way of destroying money.
My father worked 2 jobs so he'd have money to put in the money hole, and he never complained.
It started in America and is now everywhere. Some say the United States has infected the world with a kind of financial AIDS. $3.5 million families in America are facing foreclosure, eviction from their home. They will lose their home and be thrown into the street unless something happens. So this situation is what we call a 50-state Katrina. The people who these mortgages were sold to, a large majority of these people were poor, black, or Latino people. In other words, this was targeting minorities especially. So this resulted in the biggest transfer of wealth from the poorest people in America to the richest institutions in the world.
Alors, le résultat de ça, c'est un transfert de wealth, de richesse des plus pauvres vers les institutions bancaires et les plus riches aux États-Unis.
I think that the majority of people, they feel that this is a problem for, as you say, this is a banking problem, this is a stock market problem, these are investment problems.
From the European side, it's interesting being here because, as the gentleman says, things are much more controlled here. When I got a bank loan to get my house, they really made sure I had the money. There was no way I could have gotten a subprime loan here in France and never been able to pay it back, and a bank would have benefited from that.
I'm a graduate student of a business school in Belgium. I'm doing an internship right now in a Belgian bank that has been nationalized. People are scared of losing their jobs because they don't know what's going to happen next.
How do people here feel about the whole subprime lending? Isn't it amazing? People were given money and didn't have any assets.
I think they just looked at the short-term benefits of the subprime, securitization, and all those things, and they didn't look at long-term stability, long-term profits.
I think that America is heading for a really deep crisis of untold proportions. You have a deep ideological and cultural division. You're going to have, I don't see how they're going to avoid massive unemployment. You have extreme wealth and extreme poverty, and you have an armed population. That's not the case here. I think that what we're going to see in the United States, I hope I'm wrong, but I think the United States is heading towards an abyss.
Turn it up! I want my bailout money. Keep the bills coming. Sweet green cash. Just
Mr. Speaker, here's the latest reality game. Let's play Wall Street bailout.
As the crisis worsened, politicians finally woke up to realize that the economy they had deregulated was imploding. Congress was finally being asked to act. Ironically, the pitch was made by a Republican, Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, a former CEO of Goldman Sachs, in the years that firm made massive profits in housing securitization and speculation.
We must do so in order to avoid a continuing series of financial institution failures and frozen credit markets that threaten American families' financial well-being, the viability of businesses both small and large, and the very health of our economy.
The question, would government intervention fix the problem or make it worse? Would it reward the companies that profited from massive fraud, or would it lead to more fraud? Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke began a push for what might be called the final plunder.
Rule 1, rush the decision. Time the game to fall in the week before Congress is set to adjourn and just 6 weeks before an historic election, so your opponents will be preoccupied, pressured, distracted, and in a hurry.
The real story was not widely known, except through one interview on C-SPAN.
Look, I was there when the Secretary and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve came those days and talked with members of Congress about what was going on. On Thursday, at about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Federal Reserve noticed a tremendous drawdown of money market accounts in the United States to the tune of $550 billion. We were having an electronic run on the banks. Their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours, the world economy.
A shell-shocked Congress was given a 3-page plan. In essence, it gave Paulson total control to spend $700 billion. Some saw it as a power grab. Others saw the deliberate creation of a crisis to push through a corporate agenda.
2, disarm the public through fear. Warn that the entire global financial system will collapse and the world will fall into another Great Depression.
He gave this exact same speech 5 years ago.
The power of Iraq to inflict harm on all free nations would be multiplied many times over. America could slip into a financial panic and a distressing scenario would unfold. Should enemies strike our country, businesses would close their doors, murderous dictators. The value of your home could plummet, nuclear weapons. More banks could fail, genocide, foreclosures, and global war. The stock market would drop even more. The terrorists could fulfill their stated ambitions and kill thousands or hundreds of thousands. Millions of Americans could lose their jobs.
Control the media enough to ensure that the public will not notice that this bailout will indebt them for generations.
What was unique was the refusal of Congress to hear any testimony from expert witnesses or to have hearings.
$1 billion bailout for Wall Street is being driven by fear, not fact. This is too much money in too short a time going to too few people while too many questions remain unanswered. Why aren't we having hearings on the plan we just received? Why aren't we questioning the underlying premise of the need for a bailout with taxpayers' money? Why have we not even considered any alternatives other than to give $700 billion to Wall Street? Why aren't we asking Wall Street to clean up its own mess? Why aren't we passing new laws that stop the speculation which triggered this? Why aren't we putting up new regulatory structures to protect the investors? How do we even value the $700 billion in toxic assets? Why aren't we directly helping homeowners with their debt burden? Why aren't we helping American families faced with bankruptcy? Why aren't we reducing debts for Main Street instead of Wall Street? Isn't it time for fundamental change in our debt-based monetary system so we can free ourselves from the manipulation of by the Federal Reserve and the banks? Is this the United States Congress or the Board of Directors of Goldman Sachs?
Congressman Kucinich's remarks were not widely reported either. Left, right, and center, millions of Americans of all outlooks overwhelmingly opposed the bailout. They didn't trust the plan or the banks. Calls flooded Congress at the highest volume since the Clinton impeachment.
Brothers and sisters, as we stand here today, Congress is debating the plan to bail out Wall Street. Are we going to let them bail out Wall Street while Main Street pays the price? This deal is too big, costs too much, will last too long. We cannot have a deal today that's not taking into account what caused the crisis in the first place.
The House has rejected the bill on the financial intervention, the $700 billion bill.
The American public won a surprise victory when the House of Representatives shocked the world by voting down the bailout.
We just saw it happen. The vote was 205 yes, 228 no.
It turned down the first three-page version of the bailout, and the market went down 777 points.
The news media treated the whole thing like a ball game, up one moment, down the next.
I should tell you that while you've been speaking, in the lower corner of the screen,
Oh, there it is.
There it is, 738.42. That eclipses the previous larger single point drop record when the market reopened after 9/11.
The lobbies for the banking interests all descended on Washington, and they said, look what you did, Congress. You made the stock market go down. If you don't pass this bailout bill, the poor mom and pop investors and their pension funds are all going to go under.
The yeas are 74 and the nays are 25.
In the streets, everyone had an opinion.
They just passed it? Well, thank God. I mean, we've been waiting for something like a solution. I think they just waited too long.
The other side of the equation, I think that it's giving aid to those who caused the problem.
I'm telling you right now, it's the biggest scam you could ever see. Number one, Paulson works for Goldman Sachs, and whoever gets this money, when they get this money and the firm's management, he's probably going to give a lot of this to Goldman.
I think it's necessary. And if we don't, we're going to see some serious trouble. Kids are not going to go to college. People are going to lose their houses. The country's going to be in serious shape.
They're taking my money and giving them to the private industry, and that private industry is then going to continue making bad decisions.
In fact, I was a broker for 30 years. I'm telling you, this is another scam that they're putting on the American public.
Soon the Treasury Department changed its mind and started pumping money directly into banks with no preconditions and little transparency. Some of the biggest banks then bought up smaller banks, diverting money for executive salaries and internal bonuses. They were still refusing to make new loans. The oversight of Paulson's program was criticized because millions could not be accounted for.
Fraud is deceit, and the essence of fraud is I create trust in you, and then I betray that trust and get you to give me something of value. And as a result, there's no more effective acid against trust than fraud, especially fraud by top elites. And that's what we have.
Although all the facts are not in about who got how much and under what terms, many in the public see the bailouts as a way to loot taxpayers, as fraudulent as the problems they were addressing.
Yeah, we're on our way to Capitol Hill.
By the summer of 2009, the crisis had not abated. Unemployment continued to climb, foreclosures to mount, bankruptcies to grow, markets to shrink, firms to fold, and tensions to tear apart families and communities.
I think you will see a bunch of people get indicted and get some prison sentences. More importantly, and the bigger question to me is, will we see a structural change, or will we go through a long, bad recession while we waste our money struggling to rebuild an unsustainable system that should have never been erected in the first place?
As new regulations were beginning to be put in place, trillions had been spent by government on stimulus programs. These measures were clearly not enough. So-called reforms often pumped money into the very institutions that caused the problems. The bailouts benefited the wealthy. Deficits and debt grew by the trillions. It became clear that the structure of our economy has yet to be transformed.
Drop off at this first circle. Is there any way that we can get the Victory!
In June 2009, President Obama announced new financial reforms, saying the crisis was caused by mistakes. By not recognizing the government's inability to police Wall Street, investor Jim Chano says his reforms are doomed to fail.
And it's a little bit tough because the guys who are the bad guys are one step ahead of the cops on the beat every single time.
For starters, we need a full investigation, like the one that followed the Great Crash of 1929. We need to know who benefited from one of the most insidious crimes in history. How did Wall Street's wizards engineer this disaster? And who was complicit with them? Will the big fish ever be prosecuted?
Save our home! Save our home!
New rules, new regulations will help, but the media too has to wake up, to shift the debate, to include the need for deeper change and a crackdown on white-collar crime. Will the media cover these issues?
Everybody that comes on television is working for government or working for Wall Street. They all have a vested interest. They're all trapped inside the bubble. And so from their vantage point, they don't know they're in a bubble.
Reality is intruding. Financial bubbles and fictional bubbles are being punctured.
Since this is my film, I get the last word. This financial crisis will not be turned off like a light switch. Millions are struggling to survive as conditions get worse.
Well, you have to get your bills straight. You have to pay them. How can we pay them if the mortgage is sucking everything we got? How can we do it? It's impossible.
I began this film with a call to investigate the wrongdoers, the crimes behind the crisis.
So we need a jail out, not just a bailout.
People should be angry. When the money was being made, when the securities were being created, there was a lot of partying, there was a lot of backslapping, there was a lot of extraction.
A lot of extraction should lead to a major reaction. Will an age of plunder usher in an age of major structural change, or will there have to be an age of protest and pitchforks first?
We're here to see the senator, please.
These issues of economic justice must be addressed on the air and off, in the media and in the streets. I've been trying, but I can't do it alone. Now it's your turn.
The shine on America's shoes got gold.
When Wall Street stepped into the fold,
Congress paid off, workers laid off.
Hartford, AIG, and Madoff. Credit swaps, credit stops, empty wallets and empty shops. Dead bank walking is AAA. Grandpa loses 401k.
Clueless expert, clueless news.
Waiting for the sound to drop in shoes. One shoe drops,
the other shoe drops.
One parachute drop ahead of the cops. Overprivileged, overpaid, hard cash too easily made. Easy credit for easy crime. American dream, death by subprime. Time bomb ticking on every trade.
The mirror flatters, the razor sharp.
On the company jet, tooting up the tarp. Masters of the universe, the master's voice. Greed is the creed, the drug of choice. Toxic assets, the master plan. Greed, the asset of the toxic man.
Money for nothing, nothing for money. Money for nothing, nothing for money.